Hey Star Trek fans, Dan Gunther here. Ordinarily I'd be bringing you an episode of Deep Dive where I take a look at the Easter eggs and canon connections in a recent episode of Star Trek. However, I've decided to change up the format a little bit. A few years ago I started a series on this channel called TrekLore, and it's kind of fallen by the wayside, but with that series I kind of aimed to bring you stories behind the various people, places, and ideas in Star Trek. And I thought I'd kind of revive that series as an ongoing update to the lore and canon of Star Trek as each episode of Star Trek airs. So sort of similar to finding Easter eggs, but more concrete examples of additions and expansions to the Star Trek canon. So, with that in mind, here are the new TrekLore entries from the most recent episode of Star Trek Strange New Worlds, the Season 2 premiere, The Broken Circle. I hope you enjoy. In this episode, we see what would appear to be Spock's first command, when Christopher Pike leaves the ship for a few days, leaving Spock in charge of the bridge. Years later, Spock would be in command of a shuttle mission in the episode The Galileo 7, in which he brings a much more logical approach to his command style. This episode also gives us a possible origin for Spock's Vulcan lyre, which we see him playing many times in the original series, notably in the episodes Charlie X and The Way to Eden. However, I believe we have seen the Vulcan harp in Spock's quarters prior to this, so it's possible that M'Benga giving Spock the lyre here merely reignites an already present love of music that Spock will continue in the years to come. We also see Spock's continued lack of emotional control thanks to the events of the previous season, as well as a possible deepening of his relationship with Nurse Chapel. Also in this episode, the Enterprise is stolen for the first time with Spock in command. This would definitely not be the last time that the Enterprise is stolen, and not even the last time that Spock himself steals the Enterprise. We would see a very similar situation in the TOS two-parter, The Menagerie, when Spock commandeers the Enterprise in order to take his former captain, Christopher Pike, to Talos 4. The actions by Spock in this episode are also not out of character based on what we see later in Star Trek history. Spock has a tendency to undertake rash actions using logic as his motivation. For example, the aforementioned hijacking of the Enterprise in the Menagerie, the journey outside the Enterprise into V'ger without permission in Star Trek the Motion Picture. And I would even include his trip to Romulus in the TNG two-parter Unification. Remember that the Federation was concerned that he had defected to the Romulans in that episode. We learn that Dr. M'Benga and Nurse Chapel served during the Klingon War, and that their experiences were less than ideal, as is common, of course, during war. Dr. M'Benga in particular is very haunted by his experiences during the war, and recalls seeing and experiencing suffering on a horrible scale. Chapel seems to have been with him during this time, and recognizes the signs of PTSD in the Doctor's haunted look. Also in this episode, we learn that Chapel is pursuing a possible fellowship in archaeological medicine. I'm curious if this might be a prelude to her meeting Dr. Roger Corby, who is her fiancé in Star Trek the original series. If that's the case, this fellowship in archaeological medicine will tie in quite well with the TOS first season episode, What Are Little Girls Made Of? Lieutenant La'an Noonien Singh has continued her mission from the end of Season 1 and in fact found Oriana's parents. Oriana was the sole survivor of a Gorn attack, and La'an left the Enterprise at the end of last season in order to locate her parents. They are found here on the planet Kajatar 4. In the course of this investigation, Lieutenant Noonien Singh also uncovered a Federation Klingon conspiracy, which I will talk about again shortly. We meet a new character, Pelia, played by Carol Kane, who will end the episode as the new chief engineer of the Enterprise. She starts out in this episode as an inspector from Starbase 1, and we learn that she is a new species to the Star Trek canon, Lanthanite, a very long-lived species which has lived alongside humans on Earth undetected for thousands of years before being revealed to humanity in the 22nd century. We also learn that she is a friend of Amanda Grayson, Spock's mother, and in fact Amanda was the first person she came out to as a Lanthanite. Possible connections to Star Trek canon include a previous immortal being known as Flint, whom we met in the TOS episode Requiem for Methuselah. It's unclear if Flint is meant to be a Lanthanite, but there are several differences between Lanthanites and what was revealed about Flint in that episode, so it's possible that these are two completely separate species, and Flint was merely an aberration, a seemingly immortal human being. Other characters introduced in this episode include a new transporter chief, Chief J, a new flag officer, Commodore Tafune, and a distinguished Klingon captain, Captain D'Chok, played by Andrew Jackson. A returning Star Trek actor who shows up in this episode is Hannah Spear, most notably known for playing Saru's sister Sirana. Here she plays Jen, a Klingon. The Klingon War of Star Trek Discovery's first season is referenced in this episode, as is one of the results of that conflict, which is the Kajitar IV agreement between the Federation and the Klingons, which states that this planet, which is rich in dilithium, is to be mined both by the Klingon Empire and the United Federation of Planets, but in shifts, with each side getting the planet for approximately a month before switching over to the other side. This is reminiscent of the later Organian Peace Treaty, which would stipulate that either the Klingons or the Federation would be in possession of a planet depending on which government is more able to develop the resources of that planet. As I mentioned earlier, a conspiracy is uncovered, a Federation-Klingon conspiracy to reignite hostilities between the two powers. This is somewhat reminiscent of the conspiracy led by the assassins of Chancellor Gorkon in Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country. It's unfortunate that the people involved seem only able to work together when it comes to sowing division and creating conflict. The episode ends with a hint of possible future tensions with the Gorn, as the brass at Starfleet Command are worried about the appearance of what appears to be a Gorn attack ship on the periphery of Federation space. I'm assuming that there's much more to come in this arena in the episodes that follow. The primary setting for this episode is of course the aforementioned Kajitar IV, a planet on the periphery of Federation space adjacent to the Klingon Empire. Other location references come from the star map at the end of the episode. We see Station Deep Space 2, one of the early entries in Starfleet's deep space stations. We also see Cestus. Cestus 3 was the site of a Gorn attack in the TOS episode Arena, as well as Galdon Ter. Galdon Ter was previously mentioned in the Deep Space Nine episode Blood Oath as one of the hideouts of the Albino, the criminal being hunted by the Klingons Kor, Kang, and Koloth. The opening shots of this episode give us a great number of ship references. The first ships we see outside of Starbase 1 are these drone ships, which would appear to be the same style as the Section 31 drones seen at the end of Star Trek Discovery Season 2. We also see an Enterprise shuttlecraft number 5. The name is difficult to make out, but according to internet sleuths, this would appear to be the Cervantes. We also see a ship of the same class as the USS Archer in the series premiere of Strange New Worlds. This could in fact be the Archer herself. This was the ship commanded by Commander Una Chin Riley in the pilot episode of Strange New Worlds. Also docked next to the Enterprise would appear to be the USS Farragut, Lieutenant Kirk's ship that we saw in an alternate future last season in A Quality of Mercy. This episode also reintroduces us to the Klingon D7 class cruiser, the development of which was shown in Season 2 of Star Trek Discovery. The ship also fires cannons out of its warp nacelles similar to the D7s that we saw in Star Trek the original series. We are also introduced to this faux Federation starship that was cobbled together by the Klingons, presumably using parts left over from wreckages during the Klingon War. Lieutenant Mitchell identifies it as a possible Crossfield-class starship, and indeed the saucer section of the ship would appear to be that of a Crossfield class. The USS Discovery of Star Trek Discovery was, of course, a Crossfield-class ship. However, the secondary hull and warp nacelles definitely do not match that style, and I believe that those may have come from a completely different class of starship. In fact, at the beginning of the episode, we see one of these ships docked at Starbase 1, possibly to fill out the space around it, and it make it appear that there are more vessels. This would appear to be the same ship but flipped upside down. And from this angle, it looks as though the impulse engine cowling is from an NX class starship, like the Enterprise NX-01 from the series Star Trek Enterprise. Not sure exactly what components went into making this ship, but it's interesting that there are echoes of the NX class in its design. And finally, at the end of the episode, while we don't see it, we do get a reference to a Gorn attack ship, which is sure to cause headaches in the episodes to come. Well, those were the new additions to the lore of Trek that I was able to find in the episode The Broken Circle. Were there any that I missed? Please let me know in the comments below. Also, let me know what you think of this new format. I feel like it's given a little bit more energy into my desire to create these videos and bring these to you. So I really hope you enjoy it. Let me know, though, if there's any changes you'd like to make, any kind of format or stylistic stuff you don't like or would like to see added. I'm always open to feedback and would love to hear from each and every one of you. All that is left is to give a huge thank you to the Patreon supporters of the channel. I could not do this without you. Thank you so very much. If you would like to help support Kertrats Productions, just go to patreon.com/Kertrats Productions. Sign up at any level to get access to the Patreon only feed there, as well as possible shoutouts and credits in each episode. So once again, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next episode. Until then, as always, live long and prosper.